In Ukraine, emotions are higher despite the country's problems. The army is motivated and President Volodymyr Zelensky has maintained national faith. Russia dominates the country despite international support in significant parts of eastern Ukraine. The AFU is retaking territory, but progress is gradual and strongly relies on Western support. NATO and the US have supplied Ukraine with top-notch weapons and military armaments, which may not last forever, especially with elections. Many crucial allies coming up, which makes many question how the fight will finish. That's what war and territorial conflict historian Hein Goemans sat down to talk about on CNN. The University of Rochester professor examined war endings and the likelihood they were and how difficult it would be to finish the war. In conclusion, victory parades are unlikely. Goemans has studied battles for decades and found that many wars continue. World War II, the most renowned war, was one of the few that ended decisive blows that ended one side, then complete surrender. Similarly, the US Civil War was unusual since one of the two sides was not a nation. Both sides usually try to prevent a full loss, which is more common, likely to change tactics, retreat, or maintain the fight at a low boil indefinitely. Not all sides can choose. Let's examine what it would take for one side in Ukraine-Russia to win. Starting with the most likely outcome, war began with a Russian triumph. This was conceivable in the early battle as Russia tried to encircle and seize Kiev, capture Zelensky, or exile him and rule, overthrowing the Ukrainian government within weeks before NATO could respond meaningfully. Kiev nearly fell to a major Russian invasion from Belarus. Captured, but Ukraine risked flooding the Russian pontoon by bursting a dam and bridges, cutting off Russian access. NATO has helped Ukraine win the attrition battle. Backing. Putin persists. Russian forces have surged many times since the war began, sending massive numbers of mixed results from sending troops to Ukraine. Most cities, including Soldiers' mining towns, are bombed and parts of eastern Ukraine are under Russian control. Russia lacks military and manpower resources to stop conquering Ukraine. That implies for Russia to win the war, as Putin promises, major changes are needed on the ground. However, all of these options have major issues. Putin has threatened to use nukes if NATO doesn't cooperate since the war began. Stop and let him take Ukraine. These warnings are meant to deter the alliance's more dovish governments. However, various factors prevent it from working. Nobody thinks Putin or his generals are stupid enough to attack NATO directly. Therefore, nuclear assaults would certainly target Ukraine tactically. Ukraine's friends would become more determined. No one knows how many of Russia's nukes exist, and most are Cold War nukes that haven't been maintained since then. Russia's nuclear deterrence may be paper. Russia has other options, though they're long shots. Russia's biggest war dilemma is a lack of allies. Most of the world supports Ukraine or stays out of the issue entirely. Although left-wing leaders like Brazil's President Lula have blamed, few favor Russia's attack on both sides. Some supporters include Russian puppet Belarus and criminal nations like Iran and North Korea that see the war as a US opposition proxy war. As Russia's main arms supplier, those two countries, the only way the nation can receive equipment without sanctions in recent months, however, is insufficient to matter. This is why one ally may be essential. China has played an unusual role in Russia's battle, with Xi Jinping acting quickly, wrapping his arm around Vladimir Putin and hailing their tremendous power alignment, bolstering their US opposing power. Since then, China has been Russia's key ally under sanctions, and Russia relies on it as a major trading partner and supplier. Analysts say China wants Russia to win the conflict to start an age of conquest, where China's Taiwan aggression will be less opposed internationally community. Many question why China is not fully committed. Xi Jinping claims to embrace Russia, but it's hesitant in one crucial area. It has not given Russia lethal aid or weapons in this area. Russia is desperate. China may be concerned for several reasons, starting with Western secondary sanctions. China has extensive US-China ties in almost every field, unlike Russia, notably technology, and if it faces sanctions for its role in the conflict in Ukraine, might destroy the economy and cut off vital resources. One component may be even bigger. Russia is losing and China isn't doing business with losers. Chinese supplies were likely ready for Russia in the early days of the after NATO rallied and the attempt to take Kyiv failed. China supported off. Ironically, the more Russia needs weapons, the less likely they are to get them. China undoubtedly needs proof that Russia can win the war before they act more engaged, since supporting a failing war might have terrible consequences. Exceed the rewards of supporting a winner. Russia must do some heavy labor to dream of a spectacular victory. Parade in Moscow. It will need allies, starting with China. That implies Russia must destabilize the Kiev government to win and must move closer to the capital. Russia lacks the weapons for a large offensive and only China may have them. It may be able to convince China to take the risk if it can show them a concrete plan, probably starting with two Eastern European countries. and establish a Kiev puppet regime to fall. Putin would then terrify NATO with the newest insane threat, then off further intervention. Now that the Ukrainian collaborator government wants them out, it would be unpleasant, unlikely, and the only way for a conclusive win. Putin and Ukraine would not likely escalate the situation. Russia is unlikely to succeed. What about the alternative? Most analysts were pessimistic when the war began. Ukraine could not fight back, evacuating civilians and encouraging Zelensky to fight in exile were priorities. After a few weeks, folks observed the tide turn and wondered if Ukraine would win. It appears likely, but it won't be simple. Russia still controls less area than in the weeks after invading, battling over bombed-out eastern cities and suffering heavy casualties. Military and supplies are dwindling without Ukraine as a provider has. This has made Ukraine bolder as they talk about regaining every inch. Russia stole their land. The final mile may be the hardest. The West has given Ukraine nearly a blank check, with the US states and NATO backing their cause and seeing this as a chance to neutralize Russia's military for decades. Some celebrities, including an ex-reality TV star, have complained about the bipartisan support that exists for Ukraine's arms spending in most Western nations and receives modern anti-missile systems and cutting-edge tanks. With some important exceptions, Ukraine is receiving ground warfare and defense weapons. Many believe so, and there has been much disagreement over it. First, almost 30 progressive congressmen signed an open letter asking for the Biden administration to negotiate a war end, and then ACT immediately canceled the letter after being chastised for undersupporting a U.S. ally. They joined forces after bickering over who released the letter. Surprisingly, arch-conservative Florida Governor Ron DeSantis said if elected president, he would resolve the war more fairly. The mix includes non-U.S. voices. Many left or center leaders in South America and worldwide have blamed both sides. China was the most vocal advocate for discussions, helped facilitate peace discussions as an impartial intermediary, with China supporting Russia in all but weaponry. This after China's peace plan was exposed, enormous distrust ensued, would split Ukraine so Russia got more of it. Even though these documents were never authenticated, problem is there may be nothing to negotiate. Starting with two sides on opposing ends of the table, negotiations aim to bringing them closer, yet certain issues remain insurmountable. Russia claims that any Ukrainian region with a large Russian-speaking population people belongs to them. Ukraine's Jewish president is a Nazi. Ukraine should never have become independent and has truly attacked them, not the other way around, and every several weeks, it seems, which Russia controls for 9 years instead of Ukraine. Russia may want the removal of deal-signing sanctions. A sane Russian leader would be needed to conclude the conflict this complicated way. A conciliatory Ukraine seems unlikely. The most likely outcome of the Ukraine war is its continuation. War often ends in a mess, as the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Perhaps the most notable example is the Korean Peninsula, where Western-aligned South Korea and Communist North Korea are stuck. Continuous hostilities for over 70 years with a closely maintained DMZ and sporadic bloody fights. Russia and Ukraine may never be able to deliver a final blow in opposition. It all depends on Russia saying enough Russian intentions to conquer Kiev. Chances are high, but it's becoming impossible. Ukraine too wants to retake every inch of its land, but may become difficult as they advance into the Russia-claimed Donbass annex. With his army and public support dwindling and no way to refill, Putin is likely nervously trying to escape this self-inflicted situation, quagmire. That suggests he may be looking for a way out. The only question is where that exit. Putin may declare victory, raise forces, and in his grip and stop strikes across Ukraine. However, he would undoubtedly make grandiose threats about what would happen if his new border was crossed. Russia returning many Ukrainian children kidnapped would be a concession. Back to Ukraine, the West may pressure Kiev to accept this flawed finish to the war and keep 80% of its territory. But Kiev would undoubtedly regard this as a prelude to another Russian offensive. Therefore, they may join NATO for future security. This would permanently mark the seized territories as combat zones, Russia conquering territory, Ukraine defending its authority. Would it end the war? Yes, but also no. Russia's conquests would remain combat zones with the huge Ukrainians under Russian rule. Shooting would undoubtedly cause flare-ups and intrusions by both sides. The war ended, but the conflict would likely continue for a long time, lengthy time before one or both countries changed leadership. Once hot, the war would simmer as Russia and Ukraine competed, sought an edge to avoid an unaffordable conflict. It would be a messy, disappointing conflict resolution for most. That could make it the most likely choice. Want to know the latest conflict status? Watch Analyzing Russia's Massive Failures in War Against Ukraine, or see why Putin has a huge weapons problem for what's keeping the nighttime Russian leader awake. Do you like it? Kindly give your valuable response in our comment section below, and don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more interesting and informative